Why did you have to move next door, you dirty brown mongrels?
Go back to where you came from, Packy.
Get the fuck out of here! We're going to kick your fucking head in. You don't belong here.
Well, racism wasn't the only thing I had to deal with. I had to deal with abuse and poverty. And all this at age 14 broke me. I became psychotic. I began to hear voices.
Do you know that people hate you? You are scum. You are unlovable.
You should kill yourself. No one likes you.
You are inferior. You disgust people. You deserve everything that's happened to you.
Shut up! Shut up! I did eventually learn how to deal with the voices. But I couldn't ever feel calmness or peace within my identity. My mum's Scots-Irish. My dad is Indian. I am both white and brown. They do not sit together comfortably. Because of a white mother and an absent dad, I only learnt to speak English, wore Western clothes, aware of only Western culture. We were brought up Christian. Assimilation was rendered unto my soul. And so the pain of not being fully accepted. I am part white, but which part? What should the brown part do? Being in the UK, the brown part of me is a stranger that we mustn't accept and cannot love. If I push the brown part of me away, then there is a pretense of being accepted, or at least a little bit more down the road when it comes to violence. I don't get the violence I did as I did as a child. What I get now instead is going to the shop and seeing the customers in front of me laughing and joking with the cashier. But when it was my turn to get to the cashier, I get coldness. I get a dirty look as customer service. And I remember the times when I had white partners who used to laugh at racist jokes that destroyed me. And when I said it upset me. They said, you're hypersensitive. The offence is all in your head. Yes, it is all in my head. Making me not know who I am, where I am, or what love really is. When I see myself looking through the eyes of others, I see myself measured by a ruler intentionally made short. We are alienated as to who we really are or should be. We have to act white, but are not white. You have to act white to make it an easier place for white people. If you exert your colour or your culture, the trolls, the stares, the silence, the violence, the denial, and indignation come out. Being both white and brown, I'm both invisible and a target. I'm in always internal conflict, two sides of me warring. W.E.B. Du Bois called this double consciousness.
This internal conflict makes me angry.
Stop being so aggressive.
It's a lose-lose situation.
Stop playing the victim.
It causes so much pain.
Stop whinging.
I have to do something about it.
Stop being threatening.
I'm on quicksand, drowning.
Stop acting small.
I want to feel equal.
Stop acting big.
I don't see myself on TV, in film, in literature. You are always the good guy in films, in science, in medicine, in art, in everything. You want to say that it's all down to merit? Really? You've welcomed black, brown, gay, female, disabled people to take part too to see if the best person won? No, of course you didn't.
Sour grapes, jealousy, pathetic crybabies. Just put me in charge and we will all be okay.
But I am not okay.
Why can't you both shut up? But I have learnt to have uncomfortable conversations with myself. I've taken the time to know my privilege, my pain, my proximity to whiteness, how they interact with me and interact with the world. I don't hate myself anymore, but I am still fucking angry at a world that keeps this shit going. Psychiatry keeps this shit going. Racism is in part an injury. All this drives people mad. But psychiatry cares not about what we are talking about here today. Racism in the mental health system has been there since its beginning. Psychiatry has grown from the soil that has nourished white supremacy and colonialism. It doesn't want to acknowledge that. Psychiatry has no insight to its own condition. It's a danger to itself and others. But ultimately, psychiatry is terrified of giving black, brown, and other minoritized people the time, the care, and reparation they deserve. So when we are righteously angry, our anger is turned by white medicine into insanity, into degeneracy. Black and brown can't do anything without hurt, without being labelled mad, without being labelled wrong. You want us to be ghosts that haunt only ourselves. And those of you with the privilege, you are trying to conserve a world that is hurting too much people for your comfort. White privilege, you taught me to hate myself. Well, the lesson is now over. Have sweet dreams on your bed of nails. Do you want to quickly introduce yourselves?
Yeah, my name is Colin King. I've had a diagnosis of schizophrenia for the last 40 years, some section of the Mental Health Act. I've also was a person that sectioned people under the Mental Health Act as well. So I'm an activist that believes in black radical critique of mental health practice, but unification across the colour line to change the diagnostic framework and give power back to those people who are being discriminated against historically over the last 500 years.
Thank you, Colin.
I'm Cassandra Lovelock. I'm based between the LSE and King's College London as a scholar activist. I work primarily with mental health carers and how they can be involved in ethical policy making. And I was a carer for my sister who lived with DID for about a decade before her suicide in 2016.
I'm going to start with a question. I'll start with you, Colin, if that's all right.
Yeah, can't wait. Yeah, cheers.
So what's your take? You talked a little bit about it in your introduction, but what is your take on racism in the mental health system? Why do you think it's still there?
So I do a historical analysis and I go back to something called depomania. Have you heard of depomania? It's the first disorder that was used against the black community during the period of slavery. So if you ran away from slavery, you were sectioned and given depomania. And it's very similar to something called community treatment orders. Have you heard of that in the mental health system? So if you run away from the mental health system, they can bring you back. So if you look at race and mental health, are constructions of European scientific investigation. They really are constructions. And if you construct someone and demonize them through eugenic theories over 400 years, you lose the ability to define who you are. You know, your creative soul, the spiritual writers that you've named that make who you are. And over the 400 years, the construction of races is met of a lot of definitions that have really dehumanized black people to the extent that they have no existential quality at all. And then if you bring in a diagnostic framework that reflects the reality of something exact reality of what it's looking at, DSM, which is Diagnostic Statistical Manual, ICD-10, that's out of reality. These are measurements that measure reality that reflect their heritage, yeah? And then if you kind of like link that into political deprivation, economic deprivation, you look into the civil rights, you've got amazing layers of discrimination, exploitation. And what we have here is commercial business exploitation of the black body that we had 400 years ago, but we call it mental health, yeah? My diagnosis is somebody else's madness. It's their psychosis, it's not my psychosis, yeah? And for us to work together across the colour line, we need to re-educate and bring in new frameworks that are lived experience and reflect the reality of the people that experience these constructions to create new models that civilise us and re-normalise us as humans. So we're in a frightening place at the moment because statistics show if you're me, you're 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act. You're 11 times more likely to be restricted in terms of restriction. you're 10 times more likely to community, and you're more likely to die and be murdered in the mental health settings. So the mental health settings must be seen as a new form of slavery. We have to liberate people, civilise them, the people that do the work, and emancipate people. I'm going to stop at the moment because I get quite angry. So I hope I haven't upset anybody yet. I've got time, so I'll leave it to later.
Cassie, I'm going to ask you the same question. What's your take on why there is still... I mean, do you think racism, psychiatry and racism are so intertwined that you can't separate them without kind of deconstructing everything? What's your take?
For me, I think how I learned my blackness was through being in an all-white secondary school and being bullied and reading all of these horrible things written on bathrooms and being chased around and called the N-word. And as an adult, I went to mental health services to help me deconstruct that fact, and they told me that I had BPD. They told me that it was me being wrong and my identity was broken, because half of what I'd learned about myself, I learned through every negative way possible. And for me, I think psychiatry will never divorce itself from racism because A, psychiatry is built upon racism, but B, psychiatry likes it. It wants to put people in boxes and give people rules and section people and change how we live and how we're allowed to function and morph us into their version without giving us the space to learn to be ourselves. And psychiatry will never let go of that because that's what psychiatry is designed to do. As far as I'm concerned, I think psychiatry is a police. It is a policing system. It ensures that anyone it doesn't like can be slapped with a label which will impact you into entire parts of your life without even realizing. I wasn't told any of my diagnoses till I was maybe 22, and I've been given them as a very early teen, as a child, by people that I'd never had conversations with because they decided to look at my file and look at my sister's health and look at my relationship with my parents and go, oh, she's going to turn out like this, so we'll just label it now. We're just going to label you as mad because we know your life is going in that trajectory. And if they're able to know that when someone is a child and then they're not willing to interrupt it at that point, it must be because they like it, because they don't want to interrupt it, because that's the way the system is designed, and it's designed for them to stay in power and for them to have their way.
Right, thank you, Cassie. I wanted to have this kind of event because these kind of conversation and these kind of discussions hardly ever happen. I've been an activist 20 odd years, and I've tried to bring this discussion into like mental health services. I mean, I worked at the first recovery college in the UK. Wanted to talk about racism in the mental health system as part of the recovery college. I wasn't allowed to. So, and 20 years later, well, not 10, about 15 years later, it's still the same. So this is why I wanted to, nothing's going to be resolved today, but I want these conversations to happen. And this will be either audio or video recorded, so we'll have this conversation in the archives in this building, so it's there. And I will try and continue the conversations in other places. But I want to now open it up to you guys. Do you have any thoughts, any questions, or any kind of feelings that we call?
I said it was when you mentioned the acting white, acting brown. I was trying to say, what did that mean? What does acting white mean in contrast to acting brown?
Yeah.
I repeat it.
Please repeat it.
Yeah, please repeat it.
Okay. You mentioned acting white and acting brown. And in my head, I was trying to visualize what does that mean, acting white, and conversely, what does acting brown actually mean?
Okay.
In
Okay. I'll put it into kind of current context. I live in Norwich, in Norfolk, and I live in an area that is predominantly white. There are only two houses that have a person of colour. So that's my house, and about half a street down the road is a Pakistani family, a Pakistani Muslim family. Because I wear Western clothes, I speak only English in front of people. I talk about current affairs. I don't anglicise my name, but I have heard of friends who have. That's kind of acting white. And for example, if I take my dog out for a walk, I'll only talk about subjects that white culture is comfortable with. And because I do that, I'm more or less accepted on my street. But the Pakistani family, because they wear Pakistani clothes, they do speak English, but they also speak Urdu as well. And they're also, they're a Muslim family, and they are proud of their heritage. They get ignored. So that's the difference between acting white and acting brown. Well, not acting, they are who they are. But if I wanted to, if I couldn't speak a little Urdu, wanted to speak Urdu, or talk about stuff like racism or stuff that's happening in, India or something, it's not of interest. And I have learned in my 50s that what's acceptable and what isn't. So the acceptable bit is the white bit, and the other bit I have to hide. So that's what I mean, like the difference between acting white and brown. Anyone else? I mean, we can talk amongst ourselves. I mean, we can talk for England.
But can I just say something? I think it's important to contextualise whiteness to the implications in the mental health system.
Yes, I was about to say that.
Because we can theorise from outside. And one of the books I often ask when I'm training psychiatrists, I ask them to read Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask. And it's shocking that most people have never read Black Skin, White Mask. So they're only trained to work with white people. They're not trained to work. And this is really crucial because historically, there's a great book by Littlewood and Lipscomb called Alien and Alienesses, and they talk about cultural schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is when you're outside your own reality, making judgments about the other, the culturally, and making them a symptom of behaviour. So I was sectioned at 17. I came from prison. I was locked in a cell. I was beaten up regularly. I had to eat shit. I had to eat all sorts of things because they had reduced that perception to me to an animal. I was no longer a human body. Okay? So the danger is that I internalize the negativity of who I actually am and think that's justified to treat me like that as a black person. And Fanon talks about a word called niggerphobia, right? That's what he talks about. And it's crucial to mental health practice now. Because historically, there's a generation of black people that have internalized it's okay to be treated this badly. And the symptoms of whiteness that are in contrast to their lived behavior. For instance, when I sectioned people under the Mental Health Act, I went out to consultant psychiatrists, and if I was working with the Rasta, they would say, I and I, you've heard of that. So they thought they were hearing voices, and they would be sectioned. Have you heard of I and I, the Rasta phrase? Yes? Right? Counting peas. So there were cultural conflicts. But people then become a symptom of those. This is why this is so dangerous in Mental Health Act now. And this is why we have a group of practitioners who now do not work culturally appropriate. Statutory, they have to do it under the Mental Health Act. We have to have things like advanced choice documents to tell people how I don't want to be treated in a racist way in the mental health system. Okay? If you've ever been into the Mental Health Act, it is like slavery. You go in, you get the body, you ask them questions, and you drag them out. Can I just ask a personal question here? Has anybody here been in the mental health unit at all? Okay. Has anybody here got mental health related issues or problems? Okay, so we all have. So we're in the right audience, okay? Let's be right, okay? Mental health, whatever model we use, affects all of us. But we've got to ask the question, in 2023, why is it that black communities are locked in our mental health units disproportionately to any other? That's the serious question tonight, because it is a concentration camp. I work in Lambeth, I go in the wards. I would actually encourage you to go on a ward and watch how badly they are treated. It's the worst treatment that I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. And if I was a person of colour, I will blow up a mental health unit. I'm sorry if that sounds radical. They should be blown up. Nobody should be allowed to be locked up, pumped with medication, okay, to the point you can't remember who you are, what you do. You can't remember your family and friends, to the point where you get restraint. Have you heard it? Do you know what restraint is? Restricted practices? Someone pins you to the floor, peels your hand back, rubs your face down, and locks you up. So I'm going to be really serious tonight about what we're talking about. We're not talking about just racism in mental health systems and psychiatry. We're talking about a generation of institutional abuse. We saw it last week at the police. We can apply that concept now to the mental health system.
Thank you, Colin. Yeah, when I watched the news, I thought how many people understand that's what the mental health system is like as well. Yeah, I mean, this is... That's you, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So I know you do Dolly well, and Colin as well. So I really thank you for doing this work because it's so necessary. My first encounter with psychiatric services following some quite seriously traumatic experiences in my life, which resulted in being sectioned as I was going through a self-healing process, a spiritual experience, an ecstatic state, that actually I was like, but loads of people take drugs in festivals to have this experience, and yet I'm being treated like I don't know what, and forcibly medicated, and my body's been pinned to the floor when I'm saying no, which is kind of like rape, which was actually one of the instigating factors. And as a woman in a brown body, being able to speak about these things is very taboo in my own culture, in any circle, in terms of what happens, in terms of, you know, like when you're dealing with poverty, domestic violence, precarity. So as an artist, a practicing artist, trying to make a living, not a very easy thing to do, but actually, and doing that kind of systemic challenging all the time. And I had some success in my career from trying to change things, from actually making space for multi-sensory approaches to learning, more creative ways of being, working with museums and galleries. But those are like, you know, working sometimes with kids who are sent to pupil referral units, mostly black kids. They shouldn't have been there. They were super bright, but they were dealing with systemic racism at school non-stop. And people who weren't understanding the context that they were dealing with at home, and the desire to learn, but the survival strategies and mechanisms that they needed in order to survive really difficult, hostile places. So my first encounters, and I've had 8, okay, I'm in a really interesting dance with services having made my first formal complaint. They're really scared because actually they got it really wrong. To be told, to have your family told, oh, you've got very high expressed emotion. I'm like, yeah, the rest of the world, we express our emotion. We don't suppress our emotion. We express ourselves. You know, these kind of layers of insidious, coercive, controlling behavior, not understanding the family, not understanding years of media abuse from dealing like violence towards Muslims or whatever, many multiple layers of things. My father, when he speaks to English people, speaks with a really over English accent. Not at home. The layers of self-oppression that you see in Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, the layers of what they must have, I mean, I think, what's made them like that? Dehumanized. Being dehumanized repeatedly, but making the choice to not be that, making the choice to not bully anyone, making the choice to hold space for equity and conversation and beingness together, whatever, what packaging we're in, whatever our abilities may be, and seeing the value and the nuance and the wisdom that comes from moving through distress without being treated violently again and again and again and again. Even the language, mental health, it's a lie. This is not mental health. There's no division between body and mind. When the abuse is to your person, in every form, it's a spiritual wound. The origin of the word psyche is soul, not mind. These are soul injuries. There is no pill for that.
No.
And patriarchal industrial West and capitalism is profiting from disease and creating legal drug addicts and stopping and inhibiting people from moving through their pain, moving through their distress, moving through and being with what needs to be collectively held. And so we've got this polarized world where some of us see and hold the shadow and those at the moment can't. And they're terrified now. They're terrified. They're like, what do we do? But health inequity and injustice is, there's some words on a building down the road from where I live in Walworth. It says, health is the highest law of the people.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Does anyone else want to say something? I mean, how much time? Person at the back there?
Hi, I was just interested in, at the beginning you mentioned your diagnoses, and I found it quite interesting that if you're comfortable sharing just how each of you got diagnosed, because this lady here shared that she was diagnosed and no one actually had a conversation with her, and I've noticed that that's something that happens quite regularly where people are given a diagnosis but there's no conversation with doctors or psychiatrists on why they've been given that diagnosis, and things like BPD, borderline personality disorder, are very widely given out, and they're very widely, you know, when you look at the kind of criteria, it's a very wide criteria, so almost anyone could come under that diagnosis. So I just wanted to talk a bit about being diagnosed and how that relates in terms of race as well. And then also just your thoughts on whether going forward do you think that there is a chance that things will get better if more people of colour become practitioners in the mental health system? So, like, just speaking for myself, I've noticed a huge difference now that I'm working with a black therapist compared to when I tried to work with white therapists, and just the kind of having someone who is of the same background as me, not just black, but the same kind of cultural background as well, and the difference that that's made.
I'll talk quickly a little bit about my diagnosis. I experienced psychosis at age 14, and I didn't know what my diagnosis was until I was 22, and it was psychotic depression. And dependent on, this is what is so large, not only is it institutionally racist, homophobic, sexist science, or so-called science, the validity and reliability of diagnosis is absolutely pants. It depends who you see. If they've got, you know, they've got their pet diagnoses. And for example, I had either a psychotic depression label or schizophrenia label, and it was only until now. And bearing in mind, might be hard for some people who know me now to believe, I was very shy, very quiet, and very passive in my early years in the mental health system. When I started to have a voice, suddenly BPD came into the equation. And I, you know, every time that happened, I questioned it. I said, what? You know, first of all, I don't believe in it, but where in this criteria do I fit? Show me. And every time it had to be scratched off my my notes. Do you want to say anything about what she's asked, or shall I pass it on?
Yeah, it's frightening being diagnosed. I feel like I'm being diagnosed now, looking at you guys. It's kind of like really shit scared talking about this stuff, because I often cry and get angry, but I'm looking at 4 white people at the back looking at me as well, as a form of actually editing my reality. It feels like a diagnosis. Schizophrenia for me at 17 was really frightening because I was a young person. I got expelled from school. But when they do the mental health assessment, there's no science. So let me try a little test with you now, because I can prove that some of you got mental health problems. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. What time is it? No idea. So you're time orientated. You got problems. Yeah. I'm not fucking around with you. This is the first question I asked.
Yes.
What is the time? And not one of you people knew what the time was. So you're going to get sectioned. Yeah. And one of the questions they used to ask is whether it's a cultural-based question. They used to ask, who is the Prime Minister? That's a tough question now. And I think a lot more people will get section under the Mental Health Act. Who is the Prime Minister? Oosh, oosh, oosh. So there's a problem here. So all I'm trying to actually acting out this performance, like you said, that the mental health assessment is a performance. It takes a consultant psychiatrist who's Section 12 approved, a doctor, and I used to be an AMP, yeah? And we go out and we talk to people and we ask them questions. And we've got to find out if you're at risk, yeah? Now, the problem with my schizophrenia, I've had it since I was 17 years of age. And last year they asked me if I wanted an upgrade, like an iPhone 14. Do you know what I mean? Oh, I didn't mind if I was going to get an iPhone 15. Do you know what I mean? Do you want to upgrade to what? So either I could get depressive disorder or bipolar. What would you have gone for? I'm asking you. Give me help. So it is an unscientific. But the problem we've got with the diagnostic framework, one is American, one is European. There's no Afrocentric one. So automatically, my reality in African is not part of this process. Is that clear?
Mm.
Yeah. Why do I not get personality disorder? Because if I get personality disorder, I'm more likely to get access to therapy. If I get psychosis, medication and control. So I've held that diagnosis, but I really want paranoid schizophrenia, because that's going to create some fucking fear in people when I say paranoid schizophrenia, because it really scares them. But if you want to be in the process and see it taking place, you would be shocked how easily people are given a diagnosis and how the diagnosis is swapped. But the thing is, what is the purpose of the diagnosis? That is the racialized question. What does it lead to? Because if you have a psychosis, you're in problems, yeah? If you have a neurosis, which is like a depression, you are more likely to get access. So I'm living with schizophrenia for the rest of my life. I don't go out. I don't feel safe. Coming today was really difficult. Now, whiteness is a mental disorder for me. It's a phobia. I'm really frightened of it. I feel inferior by whiteness. I feel ugly. I feel unattractive.
You need a hug.
This is what you find every day.
Mm. And that's what people don't understand. That, I mean, I've met so many people who I know who get defensive about, you know, because I say to people,
I feel okay now. Thanks. Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
I say to people, you know, your cultural conditioning automatically makes you racist. Oh no, it doesn't. And then I kind of talk them through, and then I'll go, oh yeah. Or they go, fuck off and leave. But they don't realise how they're tearing people's souls apart on a daily basis. And so when I go to, like, I used to do kind of stuff within the system. Oh, it's about compromise and things will move slowly. I said, oh no, it hasn't for you. You know, I've seen so many. I mean, I used to live in Lambeth, same as Colin. You know, how many black men while I was there died under the so-called care of Slam? 2 when I was there, and you know, when I was on the ward, you could see the racism. It was so evident, so evident. And I used to work in the mental health system. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it because I you know, I was just my soul was already like ripped to shreds.
Quickly?
Yeah.
Does not make an assumption because you're black, you're qualified to work with black people. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
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 That's a really bad assumption. Because the complexity of race, as you said earlier, is so complex. You can't assume physicality gives you the quality to work. Yeah. And we're on wards, unfortunately, where there are black African nurses working with black people, and it's so tense and so difficult because this is what they did during the period of slavery. You know what I mean? They ghettoized us and compressed us into these areas. And this is why it's so difficult. When you say cultural competency or therapy now, we could have a think about therapy. I've been in therapy for quite a long time. It needs to be politicised. You've got to politicise theory to understand these structural issues that affect your reality about who you are, or you actually deny you. I cried then, I always cry at these things. They say I get more money, but it's never happened. Yeah. So I'm just going to answer the second question, what you said. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Similarly had that experience of experiencing the worst types of racism within wards.
Yes.
The experience of experiencing the worst type of prejudice and racism within psychiatric wards that I've ever experienced anywhere in my life. And I did experience bullying as a kid in a state school in southwest London and various other, like your placards. Yeah, I mean, I know those.
Yes.
And the echoes of what you hear and how you internalise it. You know, I used to get bullied at school and then I'd go home and my mum would be teasing me because I had a lisp and she didn't want me to lisp. And she thought by teasing me, maybe I would get over it. So, you know, there's these layers and layers and layers and the internalised oppression from that a lot of brown and black people experience from working in those places and not processing it properly in themselves quite often then comes out on other brown and black bodies. And you'll see this at the border, you'll see this at UK Border Patrol as well, quite often, where actually it's like getting people to do that work because they're afraid or because they want to progress or because for whatever reason, you know. And that's, so actually, yeah, to answer the point, sometimes you don't know. It's like, who's done the work in themselves? Who's actually done the work and the healing? And there's something very different. The language that's used in the mental health system is not healing, it's recovery. For me, to cover up again, not to recover, not to evolve or grow through your experiences or your traumas or whatever. That's very different. They talk always about recovering. No. How do you grow beyond it? How do you move past? How do you find wholeness again? That's really different.
When I worked for the Recovery College, I said, we were talking about personal recovery, but when you're throwing people out into society, where is the recovery from a society of sharks? And that's, this is with, mental health does need to be political. It can't change unless it does. I don't know what time it is, 5 minutes.
Can I just say something that I think we have a responsibility to try to change the system.
Yeah.
I concur with what you say, but I believe how important the civil rights movement affected mental health change during the periods of the 50s and 60s, when there was the overuse of schizophrenia in the Black Power leaders. Yes. And you had really important books written by Bromberg that said this is a political moment for us to actually challenge the system, to actually rescue people who are actually culturally entrapped inside the system. We've actually, me and Chris, we sit on so many policies, don't we? Because we think we have a more responsibility to make people accountable. Policy makers, legislative makers, redistribution of resources. The long-term plan that's come out now is pumping millions of pounds into mental health. Nothing's going back. And if you did a correlation between how much it would cost to reparations, slavery, and reparation to the mental health system, you actually got some serious investment problems there. Because unless you had those visions, you won't have that diversity in the mental health system. So I think you're absolutely right, but there are activists. I'm writing a book for the last 25 years. It's called They Diagnosed Me as Schizophrenic When I Was Really a Gemini.
It's a great book.
I've been trying to write it because I really want to write something as a legacy to my son that was sectioned, my son who tried to take his life 2 weeks ago, all the people who do not have a legacy, but more important, the academics, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, who keep on referencing people that are leading to this system re-emerging is quite important. So I do believe in some sort of cultural system change. That's important. But I can't do it alone. You guys in the room, after you leave tonight, I've got to make a decision about why you came tonight, and what you're going to do in the future to make this actually happen. Because it's really crucial. Because we sit in so many meetings where these big decisions are being made, and we're the only black people sitting at this table affecting policy decisions.
And they wait for us to bring it up. That's the thing. They wait and they look at you like, are you going to bring up racism? And it's like, if you're aware it needs to be brought up, why are you waiting for one of us to do it? And they wait every time. And all of these things that we sit on, whether it's clinical safety planning or risk assessment or young person transitions or whatever thing they emailed me to chair 2 days ago that I'm not going to do, they ask because they are so hyper aware that they need lived experience there, but they haven't figured out why. They're just doing it because they know they need to. And they're not committed or have any level of understanding as to why it's actually important. They're just doing it for their personal gain and for the overall reputation and gain of this system. And it's a game that we all play. And every time we sit in these meetings, and you said it a couple of weeks ago about, we could just leave. And it would keep going exactly the same. They would just find new people with very similar opinions to get burnt out trying to do the exact same things that we're trying to do and we've been trying to do for these last 5 years. And it's that question of, yes, we're accountable to changing this system. Yes, Colin and I are supposedly in a position to hold people accountable to change this system. But it's not happening. And where does that lie, and whose responsibility does that lie with? And there are people in that system, like Jackie Dyer, who are saying it lies with the public to hold systems accountable. Like that ever happens, no offence, Jackie. And then there's people saying that it lies with each individual to submit a complaint, and I really respect that. But my sister attempted suicide 63 times, something like that. In the 10 years she was really significantly unwell. And most of them were on mental health wards, and all of them went through complaint systems, and her inquest lasted 4 years because they had to go through each complaint to see their own failings to conclude that she died by suicide. She didn't die because of mental health services. And this question that we talk about being racism in mental health services and how do we change this system is so much bigger than we think when we think about cultural competency training and doing EDI practice and how do crisis services become more accessible, and we should close down Ladywell in Lewisham. This question is so much bigger, and they come to us asking us to define it for them and tell them how big it is, but they don't want the answer. They don't know what the work is. Whether they want to do it or otherwise, they don't know. And then they ask us, they listen, and then they go, that's not correct. As if they're the people to judge.
Yeah.
Just ending with a quick, people who are white have a role.
Yes.
I run something called the Whiteness and Racial Equality Network, and I'll send things out. We all got a role. Just want to finish on that.
Yeah.
This is not
Please finish on that. Yeah. Thank you so much to my very, very wonderful panel. Hopefully they've put some thoughts in your head that you haven't thought about before, or have given you something to reflect on, or maybe you already know what they've talked about and you want to kind of change stuff, but you're in a room, hopefully, of people who want things changed. It has to change. I always say to people in 200 years' time, if there is a 200 years' time, because the same people are doing so well running the world, they're going to look back and with horror at how psychiatry, or any kind of system, but psychiatry has treated people generally. I mean, every person has gone in through it, but especially how it's treated black people and brown people, but especially the young black man. Because I've not yet seen my contemporary, when I was in the system at age 22, ever treated with respect. And they are now in their 50s. Or, it is really, I mean, I'm sorry you were upset, Colin.
No,
but,
and I feel okay sharing the tears. Is that okay with you guys? That's where I am.
Yeah.
I try to hold it in, but sometimes I have to let it out. So I do apologise if it affected you, but it wasn't like this. I don't promote this as capital. What I promote is that I have my own epistemological framework that emerges from my pain, that has parity with other frameworks. And unless I've written that, which I'm going to write, for the legacy of the people that are dying, that's what I need to have. So people at the back there knows that we have a model and frameworks. Does this have enough political power against existing networks? So
yeah, but aren't they wonderful? So I'm going to give a round of applause.